This took place during the late summer of 1993. I was living in Montana but had a boyfriend in British Columbia, and I often traveled between the two places. We were broke and careless, so we hitchhiked when we needed to get somewhere further than biking distance. I had spent the month of August with him in British Columbia, and eventually it was time to go back to school. I, of course, not having worked much all summer, had no money. My bum-ass boyfriend hadn't come through with any money for a bus ticket either. My parents were also mad at me, so they weren't giving me any money. All my friends were broke, but we didn't have a phone to call them anyway. We were living in a 2-room cabin with no running water in the mountains. The only phone was a party line that belonged to the neighbors and was basically only for emergencies. The decision was made. I was already 2 days late for school and I didn't feel like panhandling for a bus ticket. I had to get back and I couldn't wait for the boyfriend's money to materialize. It would be my first time hitchhiking alone. I put my backpack's worth of stuff together, making sure I had my ID, because one time we hitched to the border, left Canada, and tried to get into the US, before I realized that I left my ID in Canada, meaning I had no ID to enter the US, but also no ID to get back into Canada. But that's a story for another day, and hit the road. Things went surprisingly smoothly for the majority of the trip. An elderly couple picked me up as soon as I got off the mountain, and into town and took me all the way to Creston, right near the border crossing. I walked across and was picked up almost immediately by a guy who at first gave me the mild creeps, but all he did was lecture me about how dangerous it was to hitchhike alone, how much I reminded him of his daughter. He took me all the way to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which was damn near half the trip. I was actually having phenomenal luck. I walked to just outside the city limits and stuck my thumb out. 1 hour went by, then 2. You are often walking really slowly when you're trying to catch a ride, and eventually came across a small flap of cardboard. I picked it up, thinking I could walk off at the next exit, borrow a marker at a gas station, and make a sign. I thought that might help me get a ride. So I'm walking a little faster now, and suddenly I see something moving my peripheral vision. I tense, look, and see that it's a 2-foot thin, dark snake trying to get over the cement guardrail to the shoulder. He was never going to make it. He was kind of trying to throw himself over it sideways. I happen to kind of like snakes, and he looked pretty harmless, so I used my sign as a shovel and pitched him over the wall. In hindsight, I should have realized the snake was a bad omen. Before I could reach the next exit, a car slowed to a stop. It's always creepy when a car stops and you're walking up to it, trying to judge if it's Ted Bundy or just an eccentric like you. My heart always sank a little when it would be a single man, but I soon realized he wasn't alone. There was a kid in the front seat who looked to be maybe 10 to 13. The guy was a little too friendly, but what was he going to do? Murder me in front of the kid? I was young and very dumb. I decided to get in. The man was pretty chatty, introducing the kid as his nephew. He said they were driving back to where they lived in St. Louis from visiting his brother in Seattle, so the kid could visit his grandma. The kid hardly said a word. If I remember, and it's been a very long time, it's about 3 hours to where I lived from Coeur d'Alene. He was taking Highway 90 right past the city I lived in, so I was relieved I wouldn't have to get out of the car and thumb it again. The first hour goes by, and it's friendly chit-chat, lots of family anecdotes, and general small talk. The switchblade my boyfriend gave me was cradled in the bottom of my palm the whole time, up my sleeve and out of view, but I began to relax a little. He kept up the friendly chatter, but eventually the questions he was asking took a raunchier turn. Like, did I have a boyfriend? What was he like? What did we like to do? What was our favorite position? What? I silently panicked. This guy is a creep after all. My instinct was to play along with his conversation while I tried to figure out what to do. I was pretty sure the drink he had in the console, an convenience store cup, had more than pop in it, because you could see him physically getting looser as the drive went on. He kept asking gross questions, and I was so embarrassed for his nephew, but still playing along. I just tried to breathe deeply to keep from having an anxiety attack and concentrated on extricating myself from his car. Eventually, he made it clear that he expected me to have sex with him in exchange for the ride. Door-to-door service, he said. Then it got worse. And find one of your girlfriends for my nephew, he said, with this hyper-cheerful, also menacing smile that made my stomach drop. Yeah, I had to get away from this guy ASAP. At this point, we were about 20 minutes from the town I lived in. I was like, sure, and started making stuff up about a phantom hot slutty friend I had. Then it finally hit me what I would do to get away. I put on my best calm Heather smile and said to him, "You know what? I bet she's home now. Let's go straight over to her place, and when we get to town, let's get this date started." so I had him get off at my exit and asked if we could go get some beer first for our date. In Montana, you could buy beer at gas stations, so I had him stop at a place a few blocks from where I lived. When he somewhat reluctantly went inside to buy beer, which I knew was in the back of the store, I opened my door and sprinted down the alley, about a block, and drove into a huge clump of bushes, holding myself up as tight as I could, and waited. I still had my knife, but now it was out of my sleeve. I was shaking and my heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it would explode. I tucked my head into my knees and waited, listening for his car to come down the alley. When we got to the gas station, it was about 4 p.m. in September, so there was still plenty of light. I stayed in those damn bushes until night fell, and I finally sprinted home. His car never came down the alley, but I could hear him yelling for me. He sounded pissed. I got in my front door, locked the deadbolt, and collapsed. Dirt and little leaves all over me. My roommate was like, "What the fuck happened to you?" I told her the abbreviated version, and she said, "Why didn't you call me? I would have picked you up at the border." So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind through the years. And to her credit, I had never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind, and it probably always will. Makes me a bit ill when I think about it, actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad, in around the early 80s I believe, was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in a time of need, you know? And I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger. I totally see her doing this too. Driving into the city, about a 2-hour or so drive from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and, in typical hitchhike manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me that he was really polite, if not a bit shy, when he asked for a lift into the city. Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for this guy, who tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip, about friends, the news, etc. You know, happy small town talk. She felt that they were getting on really well and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they had talked about was money and how he was pretty dang strapped for cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her someday and catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off with the warm feeling of a good deed done. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki gets this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she tells me the next part. How a week later she got a phone call from her driving buddy. He didn't let her get a word in after saying hello and told her that she should thank God that she was raised so nice, because when he first got in the car, he was planning on assaulting and murdering her once they got to that pit stop. That he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly and treated him to dinner with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:32 a.m. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous of this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we had gotten home, he tossed me onto our front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn to the party, and it was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him, so I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both inside and outside the house, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, though he didn't have many, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead, I decided I would try to walk to this gas station and motel, which was like a little less than a mile away, so I could use their phone to try to call a girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. But anyway, a little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road that I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stopping and beginning to make a U-turn, and my heart just started pounding. I just about froze up, but forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me, and this guy rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out this late. Told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride. I said no thank you, citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. Well, good, I don't pick up hitchhikers, or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though. You just look like you need some help. He just kept driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge. Told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials, and when he offered me a ride again, I said that it would be nice, because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me and I hopped in. The radio was low, it was a little messy. The ashtray was full of cigarettes, and there were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I was moving my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight-colored bandana, and some other things. He apologized, saying that it was the truck he took hunting, but it was super warm, so I was happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He asked why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked about him and he told me about his family. He was a young dad, he had a wife, and a daughter, a son, and a dog. And I told him it was like he had the perfect little family, and he laughed and said he certainly did. Then it had clicked for me to ask if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save his battery. We were approaching the gas station and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one," but he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach. My heart started pounding. I started getting choked up, my eyes tearing up as I was looking out the windows and watching the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around, and he ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down at the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out of the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing, "Never go to the second location," but I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle, and how it would be a lot harder to get away with one foot as opposed to two. Debating with myself that there was snow on the ground, but then again, snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared though. Like there was nothing but trees, an empty road, and us. I was crying pretty badly at this point and asked if I could please borrow his phone again. I don't know why I even asked, and he told me to stop talking. Then he started talking underneath his breath, saying, "Girls shouldn't be out so late. Shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you were doing to me. Dressed like a slut." And other derogatory things. As he kept saying these terrible things, too many to type here, I wasn't even responding. I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remembered the pair of handcuffs I remember seeing under the papers beneath my feet. So I used that a little, I don't know how to describe it, like in a scoopy motion. I managed to use my feet to scoop the handcuffs up, and use my heels and toes to push them under the bottom of my seat, as far as I could. I was thinking of different things I could do to try to help myself. Like if we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures, if I ever made it to them, I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them. Or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so he would appear to be a drunk driver and we would get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night, and how if I did anything, it would hurt him. But I told myself that sort of thinking was the exact thinking that got me into this mess. He pulled off the road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side, the wooded trees were closer to the road. On mine, there was a small gap fully covered in thick, I don't know how many feet of snow, before the trees thickly picked up maybe 10 to 16 yards away. He turned off the car and coldly said there was something wrong with the car and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him because it was cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and shouted at me to get out of the car because we had to go check out the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I ever heard. Humanize yourself. Use first names. He stared at me in like this way I can't describe it to this day. I don't even know how to start. He got back in the car and I slinked towards my window, scared he would drag me over the console. He turned off the headlights and everything just looked stark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years before lighting a cigarette and looking out his window and back at me, and then back out the window. He heard me shuffle my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window, he told me if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted me. And oddly enough, I was thinking of running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of the car, then I should definitely stay in. Otherwise, he could chase me or shoot me. In case he had hunting rifles in the back, I didn't dare look. I'm glad I was right. I think at that point I hit rock bottom, and instead of panic, there was numbness and exhaustion. There was still an occasional tear or two, but I just remember being numb. I talked to a psychiatrist about this kind of thing, and he thinks it just came from my ex-boyfriends giving me PTSD. It was dead quiet, but I finally just barely audibly told him that my friend was still waiting for me, and asked about his wife and children, and he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children, that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about, and he said, "I'm thinking of what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily, he just said it flatly and coldly, which sort of scared me more. I did start getting worked back up to a cry at that point, and he told me not to cry and turn the car on, offering me some heat. I just cried more and said I wanted to go home. Eventually he started driving and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, he told me to not tell anyone or he would find me. Then he told me all he was doing was teaching me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost coming to a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changes his mind. Before he could get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already down out of the truck and sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but then I stopped and remembered to try to see his license plate. I turned around but only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk behind the counter to please call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared it would be John. My fears melted away when the new-faced policeman got there. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number I had caught, the fact that he said he was an off-duty cop, just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out saying there was nothing on them. I asked if I would be able to look and the officer said no and asked me if I didn't trust him. And I told him of course I did. The officer gave me a ride to my friends lecturing me for hitchhiking, consisting of him repeatedly asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. Of course I knew. I was just too naive to think it could ever happen to me, and I was desperate for some warmth. I never heard anything back about the report that was made, so I would try to follow up, and each time I did, they never got back to me aside from this one time I was told my case number didn't exist. But that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the months and years, I asked my friend, whose home I slept over at that one night, if she ever heard of any weirdness or anything since that incident had happened to her or anyone up there, and she always said no. So I sort of let it go and I tried to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, it certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with the case. I never heard of any other odd experiences up there. Maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. But sometimes I think I tell myself all of that to help me sleep better at night. It all felt really real. Even if it wasn't real, I'm just glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night.